In the heart of Manhattan, a struggling waitress named Amelia performed a quiet act of grace on one cold October night. She gave her only warm jacket to a shivering homeless woman, expecting nothing in return. The very next day, a world away from her humble diner, a powerful billionaire appeared. He was not looking for a meal, he was looking for her. He arrived with a stunning revelation that tied her simple act of kindness to his own hidden family tragedy. This one encounter would ignite a connection so profound it would challenge everything they both believed about wealth, charity, and the true meaning of home. Before we start, we kindly ask you to like, subscribe, and leave your comments below that help us bring stories like this to you. The hum of the old fluorescent lights in the Lantern Diner was the only sound that accompanied Amelia as she moved through the motions of another closing. It was well past midnight in a corner of Manhattan that tourists never saw, a place where the city's relentless ambition gave way to a weary, steadfast resilience. Every night for the last 2 years had ended just like this. Her body ached with a fatigue that had settled deep into her bones, a constant companion since the accident. The diner was not just a job, it was a mausoleum of memories, the last tangible piece of her parents. They had poured every last dollar of their savings, every ounce of their hope into its worn linoleum floors and its cherry-red vinyl booths. The dream of her parents was a simple one: to create a place of warmth and welcome. Now, that dream was a crushing weight on her shoulders. The tragic accident had not only stolen them from her, but had also left behind a mountain of medical debt so vast it felt like a separate, malevolent entity. Each week, letters from the bank arrived, their sterile language a stark threat to the vibrant life that once filled this space. She saw her father laughing behind the grill, the reflection of him in the polished chrome. She saw her mother arranging flowers in the small vase that still sat on the counter. Every cracked plate and faded photograph was a relic she was terrified of losing. She was just 24 years old, but she felt ancient. Her kindness, however, remained an unyielding force. Earlier that evening, she had listened for 10 minutes to Mr. Henderson, a widower who came in every night, as he recounted a memory of his late wife. Amelia had smiled, her own grief tucked away, and told him it was a beautiful story, refilling his coffee for the 3rd time without charge. She knew what it was to be alone. Privately, as she now locked the front door and stared at her faint reflection in the glass, the facade crumbled. The exhaustion was a physical presence, a heavy cloak she could not shrug off. A profound loneliness washed over her. She was adrift in a city of millions, the sole keeper of a legacy that was sinking under the weight of debt. She was near her breaking point, a quiet desperation simmering just beneath her calm exterior, wondering how many more nights she could endure before the lights of the Lantern Diner went out for good. Stepping out from the relative warmth of the diner entryway, the October night hit Amelia with the force of a physical blow. A brutal, unforgiving wind whipped down the canyon of buildings, carrying with it a slanted rain that was half ice. The streets of this part of Manhattan, usually teeming with a current of unstoppable life, were now mostly empty, surrendered to the storm. The few people still out hurried along with their heads down, wrapped in expensive coats, their faces grim fortresses against the weather. Amelia clutched the collar of her jacket, a worn but cherished piece of faded denim lined with fleece. It was a final birthday gift from her mother, and sometimes Amelia felt the faint, comforting echo of a hug in its familiar weight. As she navigated a puddle that had consumed a section of the sidewalk, her eyes caught a figure huddled in the recessed doorway of a closed laundromat. It was a woman, thin and frail, her own coat a tattered garment that offered no real protection. She was shivering violently, her arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to conserve warmth, her gaze vacant and lost. The city, in its relentless forward motion, had rendered her invisible. People walked past without a glance, another piece of scenery in the urban landscape of hardship. Amelia stopped. Her own exhaustion, her own gnawing fear about the future, seemed to shrink in the face of this immediate and desperate need. A moment of internal debate, as fleeting as a single heartbeat, gave way to a certainty that was at the very core of her being. She could not just walk away. She approached the woman slowly, not wanting to startle her. The woman did not seem to notice her until Amelia was standing directly in front of her. Without a word, Amelia unzipped her jacket, shrugging it off her shoulders. The icy wind immediately bit at her arms through her thin sweater, but she ignored it. She gently draped the warm, heavy jacket over the shivering woman, pulling the fleece collar up around her neck. The woman looked up, her eyes showing a brief flicker of lucid surprise before clouding over again. There was no thank you, only a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. Amelia backed away and turned toward home, the rain now soaking her completely. The walk was 5 blocks of misery, the cold seeping into her skin. But deep inside her, beneath the chill, a small, defiant flicker of warmth ignited. It was a quiet, steady flame, a feeling of rightness that was more powerful than the storm raging around her. The following afternoon was a symphony of the familiar, a comforting rhythm that pushed the memory of the previous night's bitter cold to the back of the mind of Amelia. The Lantern Diner was humming with its usual midday crowd. The air was thick with the rich scent of brewing coffee and frying bacon. The gentle clatter of ceramic on formica and the low murmur of a dozen conversations filled the space with a sense of life and community. Amelia moved through it all with an practiced grace, her feet tired but her smile genuine as she refilled a coffee cup here and delivered a slice of pie there. She was in her element, the quiet conductor of this small, bustling world her parents had built. Then, through the front window, a vehicle of impossible elegance slid to the curb. It was a long, black sedan, polished to a mirror shine, so profoundly out of place on this humble street that it seemed to have materialized from another dimension. Conversations in the diner faltered as heads turned to stare. The spell of the ordinary was broken. The bell on the door of the diner chimed, a sound usually so welcoming, now sharp and annunciatory. A man stepped inside, and a wave of silence followed him. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, so perfectly tailored it seemed sculpted to his frame. Every detail about him, from the glint of his expensive watch to the severe set of his jaw, spoke of immense wealth and uncompromising power. He did not seem to walk as much as he consumed the space before him. His eyes, the color of cold gray stone, swept across the room with a look of clinical disinterest. He assessed the worn booths, the chipped counter, the simple, hard-working people, and dismissed it all in a single, sweeping glance. He was a predator in a field of lambs. Amelia felt the weight of his gaze as it finally landed on her. It was not a look of admiration or even curiosity. It was a look of identification, as if he had been searching for a specific target and had just acquired it. A prickle of defensive unease ran up her spine. She straightened her apron, her hand instinctively going to the notepad in her pocket, a small shield against his imposing presence. He moved toward her, his footsteps soundless on the linoleum, weaving through the tables with an unnerving purpose. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could see the faint, weary lines around his eyes, the only hint of a humanity he otherwise kept expertly concealed. He stated, his voice low and devoid of any warmth, that he was looking for the waitress who had worked the previous night. It was not a question, it was a summons. Amelia met his intense gaze, her chin held a fraction higher than usual. She confirmed with a simple nod that she was indeed the waitress from the previous night's shift, her voice even and professional despite the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. The entire diner seemed to be holding its breath, the patrons frozen in a state of suspended animation, watching the strange drama unfold. The man, Julian Thorne, did not seem to care about the audience. His focus was entirely on her, his expression unyielding. He took a small, almost imperceptible step closer, lowering his voice slightly, though its cold authority remained undiminished. He began to speak not of business or complaints, but of an act of charity. He described a scene from the night before, a woman alone in a storm, a waitress offering her own jacket for warmth. His words painted a picture so precise, so vivid, that Amelia knew he was not guessing. He knew what she had done. A wave of confusion washed over her. How could this man possibly know about that quiet, anonymous moment? Before she could formulate a question, he delivered the answer, and in doing so, shattered the reality of her afternoon. The woman she had helped, the shivering figure with the lost eyes, was his sister. Her name was Isabella. The name hung in the air, a fragile, impossible thing. Amelia felt her composure crack, her eyes widening in shock. She could feel the blood drain from her face. Her mind struggled to connect the two images, the destitute woman in the doorway and the sister of a billionaire. The chasm between the two was too vast to comprehend. Julian continued, his tone remaining factual, clinical, as if he were discussing a corporate merger. He explained that his sister had a medical condition, that she had disappeared, and that his family had been searching for her for 2 frantic days. He then revealed the detail that had brought him here. The jacket Amelia had given away, the final gift from her mother, had a small, faded logo of the Lantern Diner embroidered on the tag. A security guard, reviewing footage from a nearby building, had spotted it. That small detail, a piece of branding she had not thought about in years, had been the thread that led him through the labyrinth of the city directly to her door. As he spoke the name of his sister, a flicker of something raw and unguarded passed through his cold eyes. It was a brief glimpse of the man behind the armor, a flash of pain and weary relief that he quickly suppressed. Amelia stood rooted to the spot, the clatter of the diner fading into a distant hum. The simple act of kindness she had performed on a whim had plunged her into the heart of a profound and hidden tragedy. She was no longer just a waitress. She was now a witness, a player in a story far larger and more complex than she could ever have imagined. The revelation settled over the diner, heavy and suffocating. Amelia stared at Julian Thorne, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and a strange, aching sympathy for the lost woman named Isabella. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant hiss of the coffee machine. The patrons, who had been unabashedly watching, now tried to look away, as if they had overheard something too private, too raw for a public afternoon. Julian, however, seemed to retrieve the brief emotional exposure he had allowed. The flicker of pain in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by the cool, impassive mask of a businessman. He had assessed the situation, identified the key players, and was now moving to the resolution phase, his own internal ledger demanding that this debt of gratitude be settled and closed. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, the movement fluid and practiced. He produced a long, slender checkbook bound in dark, supple leather. The object itself seemed to radiate wealth, a stark and alien artifact in the humble surroundings of the Lantern Diner. He placed it on the worn Formica countertop, next to a salt shaker with a slightly rusted lid. The contrast was a silent, powerful statement about the vast gulf that separated their two worlds. He opened the checkbook and took out a pen, its silver casing gleaming under the diner's fluorescent lights. His gaze met hers, and it was once again devoid of any discernible emotion. He told her, his voice a low, even monotone, that he wanted to compensate her for her time and her trouble. More than that, he wanted to reward her for her assistance. He pushed the open checkbook towards her. He invited her to name her price. He suggested she write down any number she wished, a figure that would be sufficient to solve all the problems a person in her position might have. His words, though spoken calmly, landed like a series of small, sharp blows. He did not see an act of compassion. He saw a service that had been rendered, a service for which payment was now due. For one fleeting, dizzying moment, Amelia saw a way out. She saw the threatening letters from the bank turning to ash. She saw the diner, the legacy of her parents, safe and secure. The number that flashed in her mind was so large it made her feel faint. The temptation was a physical thing, a tightening in her chest. But then she looked at his cold, expectant face. He was not offering a gift. He was closing a deal. He was attempting to put a price tag on a moment of pure, uncalculated human connection. He was trying to buy her kindness, to file it away in a folder marked "Paid in Full." A slow, hot wave of indignation washed away the temptation. Her struggle was her own, but her integrity was priceless. The air in the diner crackled with a tension that was almost audible. Every eye was on Amelia, on the open checkbook that represented a lifeline, a miracle, a clean slate. Julian Thorne watched her. His expression, a mask of cool expectation, confident in the universal power of the solution he had offered. He had solved far more complex problems with a simple signature. For a long moment, Amelia simply looked at him, her gaze traveling from the obscene wealth represented by the checkbook to the deep, weary emptiness in his eyes. She saw a man so accustomed to buying his way through the world that he had forgotten any other currency existed. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement that felt monumental, she reached out her hand. Her fingers, calloused from work, brushed against the smooth, expensive leather. She did not open it to sign. She gently, but firmly, slid the checkbook back across the counter until it rested in front of him. The finality of the gesture was absolute. A flicker of disbelief, then something akin to irritation, crossed his features. He had not anticipated this outcome. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to insist, but she spoke first, her voice quiet yet carrying a strength that silenced him. She told him that she appreciated the sentiment behind his offer, but she could not accept it. She explained that the moment she had shared with his sister the night before was not a transaction. It was a human connection, born of need and offered without expectation. To accept money for it now would be to corrupt that memory, to diminish something she believed should remain pure. She looked him directly in the eye and stated that some things in the world did not have a price tag, and her compassion was one of them. The directness of her refusal, the simple, unshakable integrity behind it, struck Julian with the force of a physical impact. He was a man who moved mountains with his wealth, who bent the world to his will through leverage and acquisition. No one refused him. People begged, they flattered, they negotiated. They did not simply say no. The initial flash of annoyance faded, replaced by a profound and unsettling curiosity. He was looking at a woman who possessed a type of power he could not measure, a form of wealth he did not own. For the first time in a very long time, he was genuinely intrigued. He saw not a poor waitress to be compensated, but a person of extraordinary character. The mask of the billionaire slipped, and the man beneath looked at her with a new, unguarded expression. It was a look of grudging, astonished respect. The dynamic between them had irrevocably shifted. The offer was rejected, his power nullified, and in the quiet space of the humble diner, he felt utterly and completely disarmed. Julian Thorne left the Lantern Diner without another word, the rejected checkbook, a strange, heavy weight in his pocket. The encounter had unsettled him, leaving a residue of curiosity that he could not ignore. Back in the silent, air-conditioned luxury of his car, he made a single, quiet phone call to his most trusted aide. The instruction was simple and discreet. He wanted to understand the woman from the diner. He did not want leverage or secrets. He wanted context. Within a few hours, a file appeared on the screen of his tablet as he sat in his penthouse office, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the sprawling expanse of Manhattan. The report was concise but complete. It detailed the history of the diner, the tragic accident that had claimed the lives of the parents of Amelia, and the staggering medical and financial debt they had left behind. It painted a stark picture of a young woman fighting a heroic but likely losing battle against foreclosure, working punishing hours to keep the memory of her family from being auctioned off to the highest bidder. As Julian read, something shifted within him. He saw the full context of her refusal. She was not proud or foolish. She was a person of immense integrity, a woman who, while drowning, had refused to grab a lifeline because she believed it was tainted. He understood then how deeply insulting his offer of money must have been. He saw her empathy not as a quaint personal trait, but as a rare, powerful, and incorruptible resource. The following morning, Amelia received a formal phone call. A crisp, professional voice requested her presence at the headquarters of Thorne Industries that afternoon. Warily, she agreed, her mind racing with a dozen anxious possibilities. She arrived at a towering skyscraper of black glass and steel, a monument to corporate power that seemed to scrape the heavens. The lobby was a vast, silent expanse of marble and modern art. She felt small and out of place as a silent elevator whisked her up 52 floors. The office of Julian was a corner suite with a panoramic view of the city, a landscape of power and ambition laid out like a map. He stood waiting for her, not behind his desk, but by the window. This time, his gaze was different. It was direct, searching, and held a new, unfamiliar respect. He told her he had made a mistake. He explained that a problem like hers could not be solved with a check. Then he made his true offer. He was establishing a multi-million-dollar foundation in the name of his sister. It would be dedicated to helping the vulnerable people of the city. He did not want to offer her a handout. He wanted to offer her a purpose. He wanted her to run it. He believed she was the only person with the genuine soul required to make it more than just a name on a building. The offer hung in the vast, silent office, a proposition so immense it felt less like a choice and more like a gateway to an entirely different reality. A storm of doubt and fear raged within Amelia. She was a waitress, a keeper of a small, failing diner. She knew the language of coffee orders and the quiet comfort of familiar faces, not the complex world of foundations and boardrooms. Yet, the memory of the woman in the storm, The raw, undeniable need she had witnessed echoed in her mind. It was a chance to do more, to be more, to honor the compassionate spirit of her parents on a scale she had never imagined. With a deep breath that barely steadied her trembling hands, she accepted. The transition was immediate and jarring. One day she was wiping down sticky counters, the next she was being led to a pristine corner office on the 48th floor of the Thorn Industries building. The office was larger than her entire apartment, with a single pane of glass for a wall that offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the city. She was given a title, Executive Director of the Isabella Thorn Foundation, and a salary that seemed like a typographical error. Despite the grandeur, she felt like a fraud, a little girl playing dress-up in a world of serious, powerful adults. Her simple, practical clothes felt like a costume against the backdrop of tailored suits and quiet, confident wealth. The first board meeting was an exercise in terror. She sat at a long, polished obsidian table, surrounded by a dozen seasoned executives and philanthropists. They were polite on the surface, but their eyes held a uniform, dismissive skepticism. They saw the pet project of Julian Thorn, not a leader. They spoke in a language of acronyms and financial projections, their conversation a dense thicket of metrics and deliverables. Spreadsheets filled a massive screen, reducing human suffering to a series of data points and acceptable loss margins. Amelia felt a wave of nausea. This was not the world of compassion she had envisioned. Then, the chairman turned to her, his smile thin, and asked for her opening remarks on the mission of the foundation. A profound silence fell as every eye in the room fixed upon her. Her prepared notes felt like useless foreign words in her mouth. She pushed them aside. She spoke not of budgets or strategies, but of the weight of a warm jacket on a cold night. She described the feeling of helplessness in the face of another person's pain. Her voice, though soft, was clear and steady. She did not use their jargon. She spoke the simple, universal language of human decency. The skepticism in the room did not vanish, but it was pierced by a moment of raw, uncomfortable truth. Julian, from the head of the table, watched her, his expression unreadable, but for a flicker of profound validation in his eyes. The boardroom remained a place of cold calculation in the weeks that followed. The members, seasoned veterans of a world that ran on spreadsheets and public relations strategies, immediately began planning a grand launch for the foundation. Their vision was a familiar one. It involved a lavish fundraising gala at a 5-star hotel, a carefully orchestrated press conference, and a glossy brochure filled with aspirational images. They spoke of brand synergy, donor engagement, and maximizing visibility. To Amelia, their plans felt hollow, a performance of charity rather than an act of it. The discussions were an endless loop of logistics and optics, entirely disconnected from the raw, human need she had witnessed on the streets. During one such meeting, as they debated the catering options for the gala, Amelia found her voice. She stood and presented a different idea, one born not in a boardroom, but on the cold pavement of the city. She proposed a mobile outreach unit. It would be a simple van, not a grand building. It would be stocked with the essentials for survival and dignity. Things like hot soup, clean socks, warm blankets, and basic first aid supplies. She argued that the foundation should meet people where they were, in the alleys and under the bridges, offering help without the barrier of paperwork or the shame of having to ask for it inside an imposing building. The board was almost universally dismissive. One member called the idea retail charity, a small, inefficient gesture that was bad for their image. Another argued it was not scalable. The man named Marcus Vance, the most vocal of her critics, stated that their goal was to attract million-dollar donors, not to hand out cups of soup. They were on the verge of formally tabling her proposal when Julian, who had been listening silently from the head of the table, finally spoke. His voice cut through the debate with quiet authority. He noted that in 3 weeks of strategic planning, they had not helped a single person. He observed that the idea from Amelia could be operational and on the street within a week. He then made a decision that sent a shockwave of resentment through the room. He announced that he was personally funding the mobile outreach pilot project. He allocated a substantial budget directly to Amelia and gave her full autonomy to execute her vision. He told the board that the mission of the foundation was to help people, not to congratulate themselves at a party. The victory was stunning and absolute. As Amelia left the tense, silent boardroom, she was no longer the timid imposter. She was a leader with a mission, a real budget, and the unwavering support of the one man who mattered. The weight of her new responsibility was immense, but it was a hopeful, exhilarating weight. She finally had the chance to make a difference her way. With the mobile outreach project moving forward, a whirlwind of logistics and planning consumed the days of Amelia. Yet, amidst the meetings and spreadsheets, her thoughts kept returning to the woman at the center of it all, Isabella. She felt a quiet, insistent pull to see her, a need to connect with the person whose life had so profoundly intersected with her own. One bright, cold afternoon, she took a taxi to a discreet, private care facility nestled in a quiet, tree-lined street on the Upper East Side. The building was a testament to the immense wealth of the Thorne family. It was a place of serene, minimalist luxury, with white walls, polished floors, and corridors that whispered with a hushed efficiency. For all its expense and clinical perfection, it felt devoid of warmth, a beautiful, sterile cage. In her hands, Amelia carried a small, simple gift. It was a blanket, woven from an incredibly soft, deep blue merino wool she had purchased from a small artisan shop. It was not expensive by the standards of this world, but it was an object of pure, uncomplicated comfort. A nurse with a polite, detached smile led her to a sun-drenched solarium. Isabella was sitting in a comfortable armchair, looking out over a manicured garden. She was clean, her hair was brushed, and she was dressed in soft cashmere, but her eyes held the same distant, vacant look Amelia remembered from that cold night. She seemed like a beautiful doll, perfectly cared for but entirely absent. Amelia pulled a chair beside her, not crowding her, and for a long time she simply sat in a companionable silence. She did not ask questions or demand a response. She began to talk softly, her voice a gentle murmur, telling Isabella about the funny chaos of the diner, about the outreach van, about the way the autumn leaves were turning gold in the park. She was bringing the messy, vibrant, real world into this quiet, sterile room. After a while, she unfolded the blue blanket and gently draped it over the lap of Isabella. The rich color was a startling splash of life against the pale tones of the room. For a minute, nothing happened. Then, with a slowness that made the heart of Amelia ache, a hand belonging to Isabella, which had been resting limply on the arm of the chair, began to move. Her fingers, long and pale, tentatively reached out and brushed against the soft wool. They explored the texture for a moment, and then, in the first purposeful gesture anyone had seen from her in months, her hand closed around the fabric, clutching it with a surprising strength. A profound, overwhelming wave of hope washed over Amelia. It was not a cure, but it was a connection. It was a single, fragile anchor to the present moment. In the quiet, sunlit room, a silent bond had been forged, a testament to the simple, enduring power of warmth. The success of the mobile outreach van brought Amelia a newfound, albeit fragile, confidence. She was no longer just the waitress playing a role. She was the director of a successful initiative, her days filled with purpose and a tangible sense of accomplishment. However, her success did not endear her to everyone. In the sterile, competitive ecosystem of the Thorn Industries boardroom, her rise was viewed not with admiration, but with suspicion and resentment. This sentiment found its champion in a man named Marcus Vance. He was a senior board member, a man who had clawed his way to the top of the corporate ladder and believed devoutly in the religion of the bottom line. He was impeccably dressed, ruthlessly efficient, and his smile never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. From the beginning, he had viewed Amelia as an absurdity, a sentimental whim of the boss that would eventually become a liability. Her recent success only sharpened his contempt. He saw her hands-on approach as unprofessional and her focus on individual stories as a distraction from the larger, more important game of attracting powerful, high-profile donors. The boardroom became their battlefield. During a quarterly review, Amelia presented a moving report on the van project, illustrating her points with anonymized, heartfelt stories of the people they had helped. She spoke of a young man who had finally found the courage to enter a detox program, of an elderly woman who had wept with gratitude for a simple pair of warm socks. Marcus listened with a look of profound boredom. When she finished, he began his counterattack. He did not raise his voice. His tone was surgical. He dismissed her stories as anecdotal evidence and demanded hard data, key performance indicators, a quantifiable return on investment. He spoke of the brand of the foundation, arguing that gritty street-level work was damaging their ability to court the elite philanthropic class. The attack then became more personal. He addressed Julian directly, his words a masterclass in veiled condescension. He expressed his deep concern that the judgment of Mr. Thorn was being clouded by a commendable but professionally inappropriate sentimentality. He pointed to the lack of a business degree held by Amelia, to her former profession, framing her as a well-intentioned amateur playing in a professional league. The implication was clear. She was a charity case, not a director. Amelia felt the familiar sting of her own insecurities, but a new, hard-won strength rose to meet it. She calmly stated that the value of restoring a person's dignity could never be captured on a spreadsheet. A tense silence fell over the room. Julian remained impassive, watching, letting the ideological battle for the soul of his foundation play out right in front of him. Marcus had drawn his line in the sand. Amelia now knew her fight was not just outside on the streets, but within these very walls. The battles in the boardroom left Amelia drained but resolute. She threw herself into her work with a quiet ferocity, determined to prove Marcus Vance and his cynical worldview wrong through action and results. The days became a blur of site visits, budget proposals, and endless research into the most effective outreach methods. Her life was the foundation, and the office became a second home. Often, she would work late into the night, long after the rest of the floor had fallen silent, the twinkling lights of the Manhattan skyline her only company. One such evening, Julian was also working late, a lifelong habit born of restlessness and the immense pressure of his empire. He stalked the silent, darkened corridors of his building, a ghost in his own machine. He saw a single sliver of light escaping from under the door of the foundation office and, moved by a quiet curiosity, he pushed it open. He found Amelia asleep at her desk. Her head was pillowed on her arms, which rested on a formidable stack of city housing reports. The soft blue light from her computer monitor illuminated her face, washing away the determined, focused expression she wore during the day and revealing a profound, unguarded exhaustion. In sleep, she looked younger, more vulnerable. He saw not the capable director or the fierce advocate, but the tired waitress who had shouldered an impossible burden for far too long. A complex wave of emotion washed over him. It was a fierce, protective instinct mixed with a deep, quiet admiration. This woman, with her unshakable integrity and boundless empathy, was working herself to the point of collapse, not for profit or for power, but simply to do good. She had brought a soul, a beating heart, into the cold, clinical world he had built. He noticed the air in the office, chilled by the aggressive overnight air conditioning, was making her shiver slightly in her sleep. Without conscious thought, he slipped off his own suit jacket. It was a piece of his uniform, his armor, a garment that cost more than she used to make in a month. He moved soundlessly towards her, and with infinite gentleness draped it over her shoulders. As the fine, dark wool settled around her, the symmetry of the moment struck him with profound force. An act of warmth, a jacket offered to someone in a moment of vulnerability, given freely and without expectation. It was the echo of her first act of kindness, a circle closing in the quiet of the night. He did not wake her. He simply stood there for a moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, a rare softness gracing his features. Then he turned and left, leaving a piece of his world behind to keep her warm in hers. Despite the success of the outreach van, Marcus Vance had relentlessly pushed for a more traditional and, in his view, more prestigious event to launch the foundation officially. He had won the argument with the board, and so the Isabella Thorne Foundation annual gala was born. The event was held in the grand ballroom of a legendary Manhattan hotel, a cavernous space dripping with crystal chandeliers and filled with the city's most powerful and influential figures. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, confident hum of the elite. Amelia stood near the edge of the room, feeling profoundly out of place in her simple, borrowed gown. This glittering spectacle of wealth was the vision of Marcus, a world away from the quiet dignity she was trying to foster on the streets. She watched as Julian moved through the crowd, the perfect host, while Marcus held court, accepting congratulations for an event that had not yet even begun. Then, just minutes before the main program was set to start, the first crack appeared in the polished facade. A frantic event planner whispered urgently to Marcus, her face pale with panic. The keynote speaker, a celebrated author and philanthropist, was stranded by a storm at an airport in Chicago. He was not coming. A wave of controlled chaos rippled through the staff. As Marcus was trying to manage the fallout, a second blow landed. The lead technician rushed over, his expression one of utter defeat. The slick, multi-million-dollar presentation video, the centerpiece of the evening, was corrupted. The file was unplayable. There was no backup. The entire program was gutted. It was a complete and total disaster. Marcus turned to Julian, his face a mask of theatrical despair, but his eyes held a glint of triumphant vindication. He declared the evening a catastrophe. He blamed the failure on a lack of singular focus, a thinly veiled attack on Amelia and her hands on projects that he had long argued were a distraction. He insisted they must cancel the remainder of the evening immediately to cut their losses and avoid what was about to become a public humiliation of the highest order. Julian, a man who loathed public failure more than anything, felt the cold grip of his old risk-averse instincts. The logic was sound. The damage must be contained. He looked at the expectant faces of his wealthy guests, at the smirking triumph on the face of Marcus, and he made a decision. He nodded grimly and began to move toward the stage to announce the cancellation. The dream of the foundation felt like it was about to crumble into a heap of public disgrace. As Julian took the first grim step toward the stage, a firm hand on his arm stopped him. He turned to see Amelia, her face pale but her eyes blazing with an intensity he had never seen before. In a low, urgent voice, she told him not to cancel. She insisted that the evening could be saved, that the foundation was more than a broken video file and an absent speaker. She told him that she would speak. For a moment, he hesitated, his pragmatic mind warring with the undeniable force of her conviction. He saw the crowd, the expectant faces, the potential for an even greater humiliation. But then he looked into her eyes and saw not a terrified waitress, but a leader. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod and stepped back, ceding the stage to her. A ripple of confusion went through the audience as Amelia, an unknown woman in a simple gown, walked to the center of the stage and stood before the microphone. The spotlight felt like a physical weight, 100 burning suns designed to expose her as a fraud. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She took a deep, shaky breath and began to speak. Her voice was soft at first, a mere tremor in the vast, silent room. She started with a simple, disarming honesty. She admitted that their planned program had fallen apart. She confessed that she was not a professional speaker or a celebrity. She was just a waitress who, until recently, had spent her nights worrying about how to keep the lights on in a small diner. Then her voice grew stronger. She did not talk about financial projections or strategic goals. She told a story. She told them about a cold, rainy night and a woman shivering in a doorway. She described the simple, worn jacket, a gift from her mother, and the profound, uncomplicated impulse to offer it as a shield against the cold. She made the audience feel the biting wind and see the vacant, desperate eyes of the woman who the world had forgotten. She connected that single, quiet act to the grand, ambitious mission of the foundation. She argued that true charity was not about writing a check or attending a gala. It was about seeing the humanity in another person, about closing the distance between us and them. The purpose of their work, she explained, was to be the warm jacket on the coldest of nights, 1,000 times over. The room was utterly still, held captive not by a performance, but by a testimony. The initial fear had vanished from her, replaced by a radiant, unshakable passion. She was no longer an imposter. She was the living, breathing heart of the foundation, and her story was its soul. She finished, her final words hanging in the charged silence, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the most powerful people in the city. For a long moment after her final word, the ballroom remained in a state of absolute, spellbound silence. Then, a single person in the back of the room began to clap. The sound was followed by another and another, until the silence was shattered by a thunderous, rolling wave of applause that was more than just polite. It was a roar of genuine, heartfelt emotion. People rose to their feet, their cynical, high society masks stripped away, their faces showing an open and moved admiration. The carefully constructed artifice of the evening had been demolished, and replaced by a moment of raw, authentic human connection. The event staff, who moments before had been preparing for a humiliating shutdown, were suddenly inundated. Wealthy patrons, who had planned to donate a polite, tax-deductible sum, were now lining up, their checkbooks open, pledging figures that stunned the organizers. They did not just want to donate, they wanted to be a part of the vision of Amelia. From across the room, she saw Marcus Vance. He was pale, his face a rigid mask of disbelief and fury. His meticulously planned evening, his entire philosophy of detached corporate philanthropy, had been completely upstaged by a simple story from a former waitress. He was irrelevant. But the gaze of Amelia was drawn to Julian. He was not looking at the cheering crowd or the flood of new donations. He was looking only at her, and the expression on his face was one of absolute, undisguised awe. The cold, impassive billionaire was gone, and in his place was a man looking at the woman he believed in with a pride so profound it was radiating from him. Much later, when the applause had faded and the crowd had begun to thin, Julian found her standing alone on a quiet terrace, the cool night air a welcome relief. Below them, the lights of Manhattan spread out like a galaxy of fallen stars. He came to stand beside her, the professional distance between them now completely gone. He spoke, his voice low, and filled with a sincerity she had never heard from him before. He told her that she had done more than just save the evening. He confessed that she was changing him, fundamentally. He explained that for years he had built a world of cold, hard assets, an empire of empty, beautiful things. She, he said, had given it a soul. His admiration, he admitted, had grown into something deeper, something he had not felt since before his world had been shattered by tragedy. He moved closer, and in the soft glow of the city lights, he gently touched her face. The kiss that followed was not one of passion, but of profound recognition, a quiet sealing of a partnership that had been forged in crisis and was now blossoming into love. In the days following the gala, a new, hopeful energy buzzed through the foundation. The triumph of that night had silenced the critics on the board and galvanized the staff, creating a unified sense of purpose under the clear leadership of Amelia. The relationship between her and Julian, no longer a secret, had settled into a rhythm of quiet partnership and deepening affection. They worked side by side, building on the momentum of their public success, their shared mission interwoven with a growing personal happiness. But in the shadows of their victory, the resentment of Marcus Vance festered, curdling into a venomous desire for revenge. He had been publicly humiliated, his authority and worldview completely dismantled by a woman he considered a nobody. Driven by a toxic mix of professional jealousy and wounded pride, he decided that if he could not discredit her work, he would destroy her character. The attack, when it came, was swift and brutal. It appeared first on a notorious online gossip column, and by morning, it was the headline of a major city tabloid. The story was a masterpiece of malicious insinuation. It painted Amelia as a cunning and predatory opportunist. Her past as a waitress was not a story of resilience, but a sordid tale of desperation. Her selfless act of giving the jacket to Isabella was reframed as a calculated gamble, a clever way to insert herself into the orbit of a grieving and vulnerable billionaire. The article quoted anonymous sources from within the Thorn organization, all expressing deep concern for Julian, a man supposedly being manipulated by a master of deception. It twisted her integrity into ambition, her compassion into a cold, transactional strategy. The public narrative, which had so recently celebrated her as an inspirational hero, was instantly and viciously poisoned. Amelia saw the headline on a newsstand during her morning walk to work. The cruel word seemed to leap off the page, a physical assault that stole the air from her lungs. Every insecurity she had ever felt, every fear of being an imposter, came rushing back with overwhelming force. The story did not just attack her professional credibility. It defiled the memory of her parents, it tarnished her most deeply held values, and it sought to turn the purest act of kindness in her life into something ugly and transactional. She felt exposed, violated, and utterly alone. The phones at the foundation began to ring incessantly. The positive momentum they had built evaporated, replaced by a crisis of public confidence. The story was a wildfire, and she was standing at its center, watching everything she had worked for begin to burn. Amelia locked herself in her office, the cruel words of the tabloid echoing in the sudden, suffocating silence. The calls from her frantic board members went unanswered. She felt the walls of her beautiful new world closing in, the familiar specter of the imposter returning to haunt her. She was bracing for the inevitable, a quiet, damage control meeting where Julian, the pragmatic billionaire, would discuss how to strategically distance himself from the scandal she had become. But Julian did not call a meeting. He did not consult his army of lawyers or public relations experts. When he saw the article, and then saw the raw, shattered look on the face of Amelia, something cold and furious ignited within him. He did not see a business problem to be managed. He saw a declaration of war against the woman he loved. With a terrifying, quiet calm, he instructed his aide to schedule a press conference at Thorn Tower in 2 hours. The news sent a shockwave through the company. His board advised against it, calling it a reckless, emotional move. But the cold, calculating man they were used to was gone. In his place was a man on a mission. The press conference was a media circus. Reporters from every major outlet packed the auditorium, the air electric with the scent of scandal. They were sharks that smelled blood in the water. Julian walked to the podium, the glare of 100 flashing cameras washing over him. He did not look like a man on the defensive. He looked like a king about to issue a decree. He began to speak, his voice calm and steady, commanding the absolute attention of the room. He did not deny the story, he owned it. He confirmed that Amelia Fields had been a waitress. He confirmed that she was struggling to save the diner of her parents. He laid the basic facts of her past out for them, not as secrets to be ashamed of, but as the foundation of her character. Then he pivoted, his voice taking on a new, passionate intensity. He told the assembled media that the article had been correct about one thing. He had been a grieving, vulnerable man, lost in a world of cold, empty success. But he then declared, his voice ringing with absolute conviction, that Amelia had not exploited that vulnerability. She had healed it. He confessed that his world had been devoid of genuine warmth until she showed him the meaning of compassion. He stated that she had not only saved his sister, she had saved him from himself. He concluded by looking directly into the main camera, as if speaking to the entire world, and stating that Amelia Fields possessed more integrity than anyone in that room, that she was the soul of his foundation, and that she was the heart of his life. He did not take a single question. He simply turned and walked away, leaving a room of stunned, silent reporters in his wake. While the city buzzed with the news of the press conference of Julian Thorne, Amelia felt a pull toward the one place that was the quiet eye of this storm. She needed to see Isabella. She arrived at the care facility feeling emotionally raw, her heart still swelling with a love and gratitude so immense it was almost painful. She found Isabella in her sunlit room, the soft blue blanket Amelia had given her resting on her lap. A television played quietly in the corner, and on the screen, a news anchor was dissecting the stunning events of the afternoon. A clip of Julian at the podium appeared, his voice firm and unwavering. Amelia sat down beside Isabella, taking her hand gently, and together they watched. The news report cut from the passionate declaration of Julian to a file photograph of Amelia from the gala. It was a picture that captured both her nervousness and her underlying strength. As the image of Amelia filled the screen, something shifted in the room. A subtle change in the atmosphere, a charge in the air. The hand of Isabella, which had been resting limp in the hand of Amelia, gave a slight, almost imperceptible squeeze. Amelia turned to look at her. The usual vacant, far-away look in the eyes of Isabella was gone. They were focused. They were present. Her gaze shifted from the television screen to the face of Amelia and then down to the blue blanket on her lap. A deep, shuddering breath entered the body of Isabella, the first truly conscious breath Amelia had ever seen her take. Her lips, so long still and silent, parted. A sound emerged, not a word at first, but a rusty, unused whisper of air and effort. Amelia held her own breath, her heart pounding with a wild, impossible hope. Then the whisper coalesced into a single, unmistakable word: warm. It was quiet, frayed at the edges, but it was real. It was a word, a memory, a connection. A key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for over a year. Tears streamed freely down the face of Amelia, tears of a joy so pure and profound it felt sacred. She squeezed the hand of Isabella back, a silent, shared acknowledgement of the miracle that had just occurred. The public declaration of love had created a wave of healing that had reached this quiet room and broken through the deepest of walls. A nurse, hearing the sound from the hallway, appeared in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with utter astonishment. The long, silent winter was over. The healing had finally begun. The news of the breakthrough of Isabella, coming so soon after the powerful public statement of Julian, created a perfect storm of positive press. The narrative of a cynical tabloid was washed away by a genuine, inspirational story of healing, integrity, and love. The foundation, once rocked by scandal, was now seen as a beacon of authenticity in a world of polished, impersonal charity. The change within the boardroom was just as swift and decisive. Marcus Vance was summoned to a final brief meeting with Julian. There was no debate, no argument. His attempt to weaponize the past of Amelia and undermine the foundation for personal gain was an unforgivable breach. He was unanimously dismissed by the board, his tenure ending not with a bang, but with a quiet, ignominious exit. His departure marked the end of the old guard and solidified the new, compassionate soul of the foundation. With the internal battles won and public support soaring, Amelia turned her attention to the one piece of her past that still needed healing. The Lantern Diner. The threatening letters from the bank had not stopped, but for the first time she looked at them not with fear, but with a sense of opportunity. With the full support of Julian and the foundation board, she enacted a plan that was more than a simple rescue. She did not just pay off the mountain of debt that had haunted her for 2 long years. She gave the diner a new, more profound purpose. The place that had represented her struggle and the legacy of her parents was about to be transformed. The plan was a perfect fusion of her past and her future. The Lantern Diner would be renovated and reborn as the Foundation's flagship culinary training center. It would become a place where the homeless and vulnerable could learn a valuable skill, find employment, and regain their footing in the world. The dream of her parents, to create a place of warmth and welcome, would not just be preserved, it would be magnified 100-fold. A profound sense of peace settled over Amelia. The heavy cloak of desperation she had worn for so long was finally lifted, replaced by the quiet, steady warmth of purpose. She had found her place, a unique intersection of her own history and the future she was building. She had honored the memory of her parents in the most meaningful way possible by turning their legacy into a source of hope for countless others. Standing on the familiar sidewalk outside the diner, holding the architectural plans for its new life, she was no longer the lonely, struggling waitress. She was a leader, a visionary, and a woman who had finally, completely come home. 6 months later, a brilliant spring sun shone down on the grand opening of the Lantern Training Center. The old diner was unrecognizable, yet its soul was more alive than ever. The worn facade was now a clean, inviting storefront of brick and glass. Inside, a state-of-the-art kitchen buzzed with the energy of its first class of students, men and women from the city's shelters, their faces alight with a newfound sense of purpose. The air was filled with the scent of fresh bread and the sound of joyous chatter. The event was a celebration of new beginnings. Isabella was there, standing beside her brother, her eyes clear and present, a quiet smile on her face as she watched the students she now mentored. The media, which had once sought to destroy Amelia, now celebrated her as one of the most innovative and compassionate leaders in the city. Amelia moved through the happy crowd, a confident and beloved figure, her heart full. She saw Julian watching her from across the room, his love for her a tangible presence. He caught her eye and gave a small nod toward the back. Curious, she followed him away from the celebration, through the gleaming new kitchen, and into the one room she had insisted on leaving untouched. It was the small, cramped stockroom, its old wooden shelves still smelling faintly of coffee and cinnamon. It was the room where she had cried in desperation over unpaid bills so many times. In the quiet of this small, preserved piece of her past, Julian turned to her. His usually stoic face was open, vulnerable, and filled with a profound emotion. He did not speak of the success of the foundation or the triumph of the day. He spoke of the man he had been, a man living in a cold, grey world of his own making, a ghost haunting the halls of his own empty life. He told her that she had walked into that life and turned on all the lights. She had healed his sister with her warmth and had healed him with her unwavering goodness. He said that she had saved him in every way a person could be saved. Then he reached into his pocket and took out not a ring, but a single, simple iron key to the front door of the old diner, a key she had given him long ago. He told her that he did not want to be just a partner in her work. He wanted to be a partner in her life. He asked her to be his wife. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down the face of Amelia as she gave him her answer. It was a quiet, certain yes that echoed with the struggles of her past and the brilliant promise of their future. He slid a simple, elegant ring onto her finger, and in the small room that had once held all her fears, she was now held in an embrace that was her true and final home. If the story of Amelia and Julian brought a little warmth to your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support is what allows us to keep creating tales that remind us of the good in the world. Be sure to ring that notification bell so you are the first to know when a new story arrives. And finally, Share this story with someone you love, not just as a video, but as a reminder that the most powerful investments we can make are not with money, but with kindness. The jacket we offer, the comfort we give, the compassion we show when no one is watching, that is the currency that can truly change the world. Thank you for being part of our story today.